Okay, welcome to this week's CoinGeek conversation. And we have a very special guest today, Dr. Craig Wright, the chief scientist of nChain and the originator, along with others, he says, of the work of Satoshi Nakamoto, the inventor of Bitcoin. Craig, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you.
Now, I just want to take a little historical step back before we get into the detail here. I read an interesting piece in the New York Times published in 2014 where Mark Andreessen, the co-founder of Netscape, said that there was a sort of pattern in tech revolutions. In PCs in 1975, the internet in 1993, and Bitcoin in 2014, they all were movements that started with a sort of anti-establishment flavor, beloved of techies, and they were eventually commercialized to become mainstream and seem so obvious that people can't now imagine life without them. I mean, do you agree with that? And how far away are we from Bitcoin becoming that obvious, do you think?
I think it'll take time still to be that obvious, but I don't agree with what he's saying. He's looking at it from a very sort of jaded Silicon Valley type of view, and he thinks everything must be like Silicon Valley. Because it's code, it must be like every other bit of code. Unfortunately for him, Bitcoin's nothing like that. Bitcoin was never designed to be anything other than a mutable evidence system, to be money that can't change, to be a protocol. Fairly much it's about everything that isn't Silicon Valley.
Right, but it does involve computer code.
Yes, but then so do switching units on phones, and they go back a long time. So it won't take as long as many other revolutions. If you look at the average time from the invention of something to when it actually takes off, through most history, it's been around 50 years. So that's accelerated here.
Yes, the internet, certainly 25, 30 years.
Exactly.
Perhaps you could clear this up for me, because I'm puzzled by this. You've written that Bitcoin is an electronic cash system, it's not a crypto system, and it's not a currency in any form. So you are telling us that Bitcoin is not a cryptocurrency.
That's correct.
And how does that, can you help us understand that?
So it uses the same sort of algorithms, but that doesn't mean that it is. Now, if you look at something like Xiaomi eCash or Brand's eCash, then that was a cryptocurrency. It actually uses blinding and other such things to cryptographically hide something. Cryptography is secret writing. Bitcoin is the exact opposite of that. Bitcoin is basically a public ledger. So it's designed to be private, but it doesn't actually encrypt things. You can encrypt data and store it in the blockchain. But the difference here is Bitcoin itself is a set of digital signatures. It is a chain of evidence, and it's fairly much everything that those other systems that aim for an anonymous sort of transfer is not. So,
but what about it not being a currency?
Currency is actually basically a word that lawyers use to define something that is used by the state. So money doesn't mean currency, although currency means money. So to be currency, it needs to be something like legal tender, fiat, etc. So if you require that bills are paid in US dollars, because you're in the US, or cable or pounds here in Britain, or euros in France and Spain, etc., then that's currency.
Right, so currency has to be official in some way.
Correct,
Yep.
yes.
But you want Bitcoin to become widely used. Would you like it to be adopted by states so that it can claim to be a currency?
In time it will be, but what I see first will be the sort of release of tokenized fiat. So states, central banks, etc., will use the sort of capabilities of Bitcoin to actually then print their own money on top of it.
Right, so they're using it as a sort of mechanism.
Correct.
Rather than the value store itself.
Yes.
Right.
Although it's not actually a value store either. That's something people get wrong. Everyone loves to run around going a store of value because gold used to be a store of value. Gold is an inflation hedge. By definition, a store of value is something that you contract in. So I can't use Bitcoin as a store of value unless I contract in Bitcoin. If I pay my rent in a fixed amount of Bitcoin, then Bitcoin is a store of value. If I have $1,000 a month that I need to pay, even if I pay that using Bitcoin, then Bitcoin's not a store of value. If my bill says I must pay $1,000 a month, then dollars happens to be a store of value. It can't change. It doesn't matter if the value compared to other currencies in the world goes up or down. That's irrelevant. Store of value means that those contracts you have to pay may be paid the same way.
But if my landlord says I can pay in Bitcoin, does that make the Bitcoin that I pay a store of value?
If you pay a fixed amount of Bitcoin.
Right. So it requires people to trust the sort of exchange rate in order to...
Well, you don't even have the exchange rate. So it's actually used in that.
Yes, you have to, the landlord would have to not be worried that they were losing out by charging in Bitcoin.
Correct.
Yeah. Do you see the problem of massive debt incurred by states with their currencies as something that will help push people towards using Bitcoin?
Some states, yes, ones like Greece in the past, but the claims of collapse in the US government, etc., they're overblown.
So people who support Bitcoin shouldn't be looking forward to sort of world economic disaster, so that...
No, unfortunately that's the wrong type of people that have been attracted.
Right, okay.
That's not what Bitcoin helps with, nor any other cryptocurrency for that matter.
Now, the other side of the whole Bitcoin ecosystem is the blockchain and your development of the metanet. Now, blockchain was never mentioned in the original white paper. Was that part of your thinking, or has that sort of just emerged?
Well, if you look at the original code in the comments, you have blockchain is used twice, although it was block space chain. I get
that's why my find didn't pick it up then.
Correct. I get a lot of things that people don't like I capitalized C in Bitcoin and things like that, and I got a lot of Satoshi would never do that until people started looking and going, oh, actually he did, and suddenly just ignore me on that point. And time chain was also used, and that one doesn't have a space.
You've talked about the ad-based tragedy of the commons in the internet today. I mean, tell me about the opportunity that you see for Bitcoin to replace the sort of ad-based, possibly the tech giants altogether.
Well, it changes everything in giving people control of their own lives. Rather than having people like Twitter or Facebook owning everything you're doing, it now allows you to start creating your own space.
There's a growing awareness of privacy and the question of do you own your data. But on the other hand, I think a lot of people are prepared to sort of do the bargain. Okay, we'll sell you that and we'll take the free services.
They don't really have an option.
Well, they could just not use the services if they wanted.
How would you do that these days? I mean, it's like saying don't use electricity. I mean, when you're seeing everything being connected and people communicate this way, you have to use it for work, etc. How?
But then how are you going to say to people, so you're not that happy with these services, how about just paying a little bit instead? Do you think that is going to work?
Of course, because you're paying now. A lot of people pay for Google so that they have email that is stored, or they pay extra for Microsoft or Dropbox. So people do that already, but the difference is they're still also selling their data. So this could be cheaper. For a start, if you're considering something like Google, right now they're selling ads and giving you a terrible sort of set of ad-based responses. And people are moving over to DuckDuckGo and others. But imagine that you pay 1/10 of a cent every time you do a search, or even less. in time maybe a thousandth of a cent. And what's that really going to matter to you? The model for advertisements is incredibly inefficient. I mean, you have hundreds of ad impressions to get someone to click one or two, and that just doesn't work. On top of that, it leads to a whole lot of fraud and crime. People posing as bots, etc., around the world to do click farms, and I mean that then requires others, like Microsoft, have teams of people following bots on their browser just to try and find out who might be trying to cheat them out of ad revenue.
As well as your interest in the sort of technology behind blockchain, you have an interest in the law. You've been studying the law and stuff, and N-Chain, where you work, is accumulating an impressive collection of patents.
Yes.
Now, what's the master plan behind that?
We get to dictate how things evolve, and reality is that people's property includes anything they create, their labour. And labour doesn't mean there's something digging in the ground. Labour is mostly by thought. If you think about it, who is the person who deserves the labour, the farmer or the ox? If we have someone leading a pair of oxen pulling a plough, is it the farmer who actually led them and did everything, or do the ox deserve to have rights outside of Peter and a couple other wacky sort of extremists? I think most of us would actually agree that the farmer is the one who is rational, who actually controls the action, who dictates what happens, and when he spends those long hours leading those farm animals, that he, through his thought, created something. And that's the same with intellectual property. So the reality is, if we want people to keep creating things, to make works of literature, of art, of everything, then we have to actually reward them and incentivize them for their creation.
And so what this is going to mean is that in some cases, or quite a lot of cases, you're going to have to go after people and say, you're using something that we've developed and we've patented.
Yes.
And that will allow people, that will sort of encourage people to use Bitcoin SV as a chain.
Yes.
I mean, how do you balance that perfectly understandable desire to sort of be rewarded for the work that you've done with the somewhat more idealistic intentions of Bitcoin to sort of transform the world? And you're sort of, when you developed Bitcoin, you were sort of giving something to the world, I would say, or did you not see it like that at all?
I don't see it like that at all.
But there wasn't a patent on the original Bitcoin.
Well, there are a few reasons for that. One, you can't be pseudonymous and have a patent. So there's no way. It's not like copyright, where you can actually have a pseudonymous copyright. But to patent something, the actual author needs to be known and visible, etc. So there is no way to pseudonymously patent.
But you would have liked to.
It would have been good if I could have, but it also it would have cost a lot of money, etc. The reality is you needed people to start taking it up and developing it. A lot of early people were involved in making sure the code worked. Any software that is based on sort of complex cryptographic algorithms, digital signatures, hashing, things like that, needs to be open source. People need to be able to find where the errors and vulnerabilities are.
Right, so you needed to sort of allow a crowd to be involved.
And there were a lot of problems in the early Bitcoin code.
Right. Now, you're busy doing 2 PhDs at the moment.
That's correct.
How many have you got already?
Well, I've got a doctorate in theology, which is a professional doctorate. I've got a PhD in computer science/economics. And I'm doing a PhD in applied mathematics right now at CNAM in Paris.
In French?
Only partly. I can read French a lot better than I can speak. I used to spend a lot of time in Canada